So, if you're a charter member, you've probably heard me talk about the Bermuda Mystery Roses in the past, but most of you maybe have not, although most of you probably grow at least a couple of them. So we thought it would be a good idea to remind ourselves of what are these roses and why do we want to grow them. First off, Bermuda is not in the Caribbean. If you ask most people where it is, they think, well, it's down somewhere around Jamaica maybe. No, it isn't. It's east of South Carolina, 600 miles. It's one of the most remote inhabited islands in the world, more than 600 miles from the next living human. 21 square miles of land. It is the top of one side of a millions of years extinct volcano. 600 miles from Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. They don't get frost ever, but they do get chilly winters because they're far enough north for it to turn cool, but they're in the middle of the Gulf Stream, and so they never get frost. In fact, I don't know that they ever get below mid-40s, so it's kind of a South Florida type climate. They are prone to hurricanes. They tend to get 2 or 3 a year, and their soil is a very high pH limestone. It's mainly coral, very much like they have down southwest of Miami. And in Bermuda, you're never more than 1.5 miles from seawater, and so there is salt in all of the soils, especially after a storm. So here's a picture. They talk about it as being the island in the singular. It's actually more than 150 islands, the biggest ones of which are inhabited and have bridges connecting them, so it feels like it's one island. In 1609, the British ship Sea Venture was going to Jamestown Colony, and it shipwrecked on Bermuda, and everybody survived. And Shakespeare wrote The Tempest based on that wreck, with a lot of extra fictional stuff in the play. And then a year later, the survivors built a ship which they called the Deliverance. They blowed up Bermuda cedar, which is a native juniper species that grows in the island, and sailed on to Jamestown. Some people stayed in Bermuda, others went to Jamestown, realized that that colony was doomed, and came back to Bermuda. So some people went there twice, but ended up living in Bermuda. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was on that ship, and he also then later was on the Mayflower. And Stephen Hopkins, probably half of us in this room have Stephen as a grandparent, because he had 49 billion children, all of which also had lots of children, all of which then populated all of New England. So it's not unusual to have Stephen Hopkins as a grandfather. So this is a replica of the Deliverance, also built out of Bermuda cedar, and it's in St. George's Harbor in Bermuda. The original one doesn't exist anymore. So today, Bermuda is a self-governing British island territory. They have their own parliament. Parliament always meets in formal white English-style wigs and Bermuda shorts. So it's an interesting phenomenon to watch them walking down the street on their way to work. And they're governed by a governor appointed by the Crown. As you fly in, you recognize it as a really beautiful place with deep, bright blue water. It is, I think, one of the prettiest tropical-looking places I've ever been. And then their buildings are painted in various pastel shades, so that gives them a lot of character as well. I've been there, I think, 8 times now. It might be 9 in all seasons of the year. Bermuda is crowded. They have a local population of 50-some thousand on those 21 square miles. And on any given day, they may have at least that many visitors or more than that. So there's a lot of people, and therefore residents are only allowed 1 car per family. You can have as many motor scooters as you want, but never more than 1 car in a household. Foreigners are forbidden to drive, so there are no rental cars. So what you do is you take the pink bus everywhere, and it's a very efficient system, and you can just hop on, hop off almost anywhere. It's pretty cheap. There's City Hall in Hamilton and the cathedral. They do not have an official state religion, but as with the English, they tend to be Anglican. This is Front Street, the main street for shopping for tourists. So the Bermuda Rose Society was founded in 1954, and it is the world's first rose society dedicated specifically to preserving their old roses. They recognized that they had roses that nobody else was growing, and formed a society to do that. Something I've always found interesting that they do at their monthly meetings, they have what they call the bench. So this is a bench. It's done like a regular rose show, but it's not judged. And so people don't have to worry about bringing in a less than perfect flower. If you have a flower that you like, you just bring it in and put it on the bench. And then they will have a judge that goes up and talks about, this one's really easy to grow in Bermuda. This one, if you were going to grow this, you would have to spray it for black spot, etc. They can explain that. And so that encourages people to plant the roses that will do well for them. Also, something I think is kind of cool is that if you join their society, they give you a plant of one of their mystery roses. So you've got a rose bush on your first date, remember? Which I think is kind of
cool. Maybe we should adopt that.
Well, maybe so. They have published 3 books over the years, and I have all 3, kind of describing what their roses are like. I think the one on the right is still in print and available. I've not seen it for sale lately, but I think you can still get it. They have on the island a National Trust property. It's an estate called Waterville, and the Bermuda Rose Society maintains the national collection of roses there in this garden. They refer to that as the Waterville Garden. That's my sister Rosemary, as some of you know, in that garden. Every time I go, the garden has changed because, as I said, they get 2 or 3 hurricanes a year. And so here's the remains of the last one. And the roses getting blown out of the ground, they plant new ones. And so you never know for sure what you're going to see at Waterville. But they always try to have a complete collection of their so-called mystery roses there. And obviously then they also interplant them with annuals and perennials and other types of plants. They also have a national botanic garden near Hamilton, and this is the rose garden in that garden, which is also very much maintained by volunteers from the society. Lorna Mercer, you'll see a picture of her in a few moments, is the lady who donated almost all of the varieties that we now grow to Florida Southern, and therefore that are grown throughout the U.S. And Lorna's gone now, but she was a big power in that rose society for many years. So this is an area dedicated to her at the Botanic Garden. They have in a government Department of Agriculture greenhouse called Tulo Valley. Is where they do their cuttings. So this is their mist bed. And I've tried to convince them for years to take the roof off of that. They always complain that it's too hot, and it is too hot. But that's because they have a roof on it in a semi-tropical climate. So I'm still trying to convince them that they would do better without a roof. But they root cuttings, and then they have 1 or 2 annual rose sales to the public. And so they're really great promoters of their own roses. This is one of their private growers. This lady was president of the society at the time, supplementing the Tulo Valley crop. They always sell out immediately whenever they have a rose sale. In 1987, the World Federation of Rose Societies held a regional meeting in Bermuda, and that was the first time I had ever been. I was going as a speaker about our Rose Mosaic Virus program. And while we were there, the Heritage Rose Foundation president at that time, Charles Walker, and then Ruth Leonard and I sent plants to the Huntington Garden near Pasadena, California. That would have been, as far as we know, the first time the Bermuda roses came to the U.S. And we sent them by mail, so that's Ruth on the left and Charles on the right. And Elizabeth Carswell, who is one of their members. Some of you may remember Elizabeth. They used to have a home also in the Naples area, and she came to some of our meetings for a while. She's also passed away now. So this is packing up plants to send. Well, with a long shipping time and also getting through U.S. Customs, most of those plants died. Almost none of those made it alive into the Huntington. So a couple years later, Claire Martin, who was the horticulturist at the Huntington, went to Bermuda as a speaker, and he brought back plants with him, and so the Huntington did finally get a full collection. I'm not aware that they ever distributed those then to the nursery industry. So in January of '88, I was so taken with the beauty of Bermuda that I said to my parents, we need to go there for a vacation. So we went in January of '88. And I brought back Glenwood, at that time, all of the mystery roses that we knew of, brought them in under a federal quarantine permit. They went through the 2-year quarantine here at Florida Southern, and then into our garden. And then from there, we distributed them to nurseries. And as far as we know, all of the Bermuda roses available in North America came through Florida Southern's gardens. So this is Lorna. She donated most of the varieties. Smith's Parish did not come from her, and I think Emmie Gray did not come from her, but everything else did. And Margaret King with her plant of Smith's Parish. Neil and Lisbeth Cooper. At the Deep South meeting, I'm going to be talking about great rosarians, and by great, I don't mean they grow good roses. I mean they're good people. And these folks are going to be on my list. I went to Bermuda in '87. Atlanta had an ice storm, and so I got through and my luggage didn't, and my luggage didn't get there for 5 more days. And I was speaking the following morning. And so Neil and Lisbeth realized that I was about the size of their son, who was off studying in some other country at the time. So they loaned me a wardrobe for the week. And I stayed with them, and it was just really cool. So they've always been some of my favorite people and great rose growers. Felicity and Peter Holmes. Peter's a recent past president of their society. That's a big change. They used to always have women as presidents. In fact, most of the society was women. But Peter has been president. And if you ever go to Bermuda, I will recommend that you stay at their bed and breakfast. It's not only one of the more reasonably priced places, but it's centrally located and it's right next to 2 bus stops, so it's great. This was in '88, that first time I took my parents, and we did a propagation workshop to show them how to graft on Virginiana. They grow almost all their roses on en route, and as far as I know, they still do. They're very much traditionalists, so I don't think anybody decided to try to use Virginiana. And then in 2012, my sister Rosemary and I went and visited, so these are some of their folks. You can see they're aging there over the years. Many of those folks, most of those folks actually are gone now, and that's unfortunate. At the World Federation meeting, the Bermuda Post Office did this series of postage stamps to commemorate the old roses of Bermuda. Not all of those are mystery roses. Some of those are known roses, like Rosette de Lisi down there on the bottom left. So this was the first planting out of quarantine. When you bring roses in for quarantine, you have to keep them for 2 years at least 10 meters away from the next nearest rose. And so we grew ours on the outside wall of a greenhouse, the inside of which was citrus at that time. And you have to keep them there for 2 years. And if you prune them or deadhead them, you put all the trimmings in a bag and you have to show it to the inspector before you throw it away. And you don't give cuttings to anybody ever, or they can, I mean, it's a federal crime to do so. And if one dies, you have to keep the dead body and show that to the inspector. The inspector can show up any time at all during business hours, always unannounced, and he must be able to get in and look at your plants. So quarantine is a horrendous hassle. And we said never again. People often say, well, why don't you bring in the rest of the mystery roses? I'm not interested. It would be nice to have them here. I don't want to be involved. It's a horrendous process. And it's gotten much more difficult in recent years. And in a sense, you can't blame the USDA. We certainly don't want weird new pests and diseases on our roses. On the other hand, the fact that there are no new pests or diseases of roses in Bermuda and that their quarantine laws are more strict than ours makes no difference to the USDA. If they're coming into the US, you have to do it their way. So anyway, once they came out of quarantine, we planted them. This is the old garden, some of you will remember, just north of this building. And so along the fence there, those are all Bermuda roses. Looking down from the 3rd floor of this building, these are alternating Smith's Parish and Red Smith's Parish, both of which are Bermudian, and there's the Bermuda row. They had their 50th Bermuda Rose Society anniversary in 2004, and I was asked to come and speak, and that was a wonderful privilege. So at that meeting, they took pictures of all of the living past presidents, and most of them were there. They only haven't lost a couple of them. Their Rose Society is known for their amazing arrangements, so this was at that 50th celebration. That arrangement's probably 6 feet tall. And in their rose shows, which they do have judged shows as well, they do a shadow box exhibit, which is to look like a painting, and so they're quite famous for that as well.
Wow.
So here's Charles Walker speaking at their 50th anniversary event with one of their mystery roses. This is Yellow Mutabilis on the table. So what exactly is a mystery rose? They're mostly Chinas and teas. Some of them seem to be bourbons or noisettes. And they may be historic named roses whose identity has been forgotten. Or they could be seedlings or sports that occurred in Bermuda. Nobody really knows. They just know these are roses that have grown in people's backyards for years, maybe generations, and they just refer to them as so-and-so's rose. And nobody really knows what they are, so they're mystery roses in that sense. They are usually highly disease resistant. They're tolerant of poor alkaline salty soils and violent storms because they've survived there for generations. And so they've really had a lot of pretty tough natural selection that has allowed them to survive. And for that reason, we thought this might be a good choice for Florida, as it turns out most of them are. A lot of them do well in their own roots, even here. We grow a Smith's Parish always in its own roots in Florida. I wouldn't even think of grafting it. It has no reason to be grafted. And then several of the others also do pretty well in their own roots, although I do graft most of the rest of them. So I've got just kind of a catalog here of those roses, and I want to talk a little bit about what I like and don't like about them. You may find that they behave differently in your garden. When you see one that's called Bermuda's something or other, it's because they thought it was that rose. So in this case, they thought it was Anna Olivier. It was later proven not to be the real Anna Olivier, so now we don't know what it is, and so they call it Bermuda's Anna Olivier. Usually yellow, it sometimes has a little bit of pink on it. It can fade to almost white. This is one that I like a lot when I see it growing in people's gardens, but in my garden, it always dies back and then completely dies within 2 years. I've never been able to keep it alive longer than that. And yet other people tell me it grows like a weed for them. So I don't know what's going on with mine, but it doesn't like me. Miss Atwood is quite a beautiful rose. This is one that I saw growing in Lorna Mercer's garden at that World Federation meeting, and mentioned to somebody I'd like to get a cutting of that one, and they said, Lorna doesn't give that one to anybody. So I asked her, and she said, well, yes, I'll give you one. So I think we got Miss Atwood before the rest of the Bermuda Rose Society did. This one does have a tentative actual identity. I'm not remembering what it is. But if you look it up on helpmefind.org, it does suggest what may be the real rose. But it's a large growing tea rose in shades of yellow and apricot and pink, just depending on the weather. You get more pink with cool weather. Bermuda's Papa Gontier. There is a real Papa Gontier which sported to form the variety rainbow. And the California form of what they call Papa Gontier is apparently the real thing, because it does sport to become rainbow, and rainbow sports back to be their version, which is different from this rose. On the other hand, if you suggest that to a Bermudian, them's fighting words. They don't even want to discuss it. This is the real Papa Gontier, and you should shut up now. So there. I don't know what's going on there, but there's definitely some strong feeling. In any case, it's a great rose. It's a tea. It's always this deep pink, sometimes red, with little white freckles over it all the time. That's not botrytis. That's part of the rose. And it either makes a really amazingly huge shrub, or I like to grow it as a pillar. Training it on a pillar as a small climber is a really good way to grow this rose. Brightside Cream is another one that's a climber. It's probably a noisette, although I've never heard anybody suggest an actual named noisette that it could be. There it is in my garden. That arbor is 8 feet tall and 8 feet across, and it eventually crosses over one of the arms. So you've got 16 feet of rose there. That's growing with Normal Hall on the other corners. Maitland White is an odd thing. It may be an early hybrid tea or a late tea. It acts kind of like in between the two. Makes a really big bush. That thing is probably 7 feet tall. Blooms all the time, usually anywhere from 1 to 3 flowers in a cluster. And the weird thing about it is nobody really suggests what this might be, and yet this has to be a rose that was in commerce, because it has also been found in Puerto Rico, which, as I've said, is nowhere near where Bermuda is. And so if you buy the rose Puerto Rico from Antique Rose Emporium, this is the rose you get. And it came to them from Puerto Rico. It can be pure white in hot weather, or it can be kind of a blush pink in cool weather. But a really good rose, very strong grower. Emmie Gray is named for an elementary school teacher, and I think this picture was actually taken in her yard. She's been dead for many years, but the rose is still in the yard. This is small, it's maybe the size of a quarter, and ranges from deep pink to almost bright wet red in cool weather. Very easy to grow. It's a pure China, so it never gets black spot. It really doesn't have any problems. The reason I'm not more excited about this rose, and I do like single flowered roses, but it makes a very large bush with relatively few flowers at a time. So, see, you have almost 7 minutes there. So in my opinion, it's just too shy of a bloomer. It's always in bloom, but you'll get 5 or 6 of those flowers on a 6-foot tall bush, and to me, that's just not productive enough. I keep it, I like it, but it's not one that I highly recommend. Carnation then was named because somebody thought it looked like a carnation, and people argue over whether this is really a tea or a China. I think it's somewhere in between. Very easy to grow, again, makes a big bush, and if I had a complaint about it, this one also, I would say, simply doesn't make enough flowers at a time. What you have is a green bush with some flowers on it, rather than a pink bush, which you'd like. But it does have a few flowers all the time, and they cut well. You get nice long stems on this one, which you wouldn't expect from a China. Sancy is probably actually Étoile de Lion. This is one that we are reasonably sure is the same rose. I don't know that anybody's done DNA on it yet. Depending on the weather, in hot weather it can be white. In cooler weather it'll develop some yellow. Agrippina, as they grow it, is Cramoisi supérieure, and so they consider it a mystery rose, but I think there's no question at all this is Cramoisi supérieure, which is a China, very much like Louis Philippe. There it is growing in Bermuda. If you don't grow either it or Louis Philippe, they make great big shrubs. I find the easy way to tell those two apart is if you grow them without pruning them. Louis Philippe will always be taller than wide, and Agrippina will always be wider than tall, without exception, if you haven't pruned it. So that's a good way to tell those two apart. Looking at any one flower, it can be hard to tell them apart. If you look at a whole bunch of flowers on a bush, there is a tendency for the Agrippina to be more camellia shaped, and the Louis Philippe to be more open and fluffy with more white in the middle. But if you're just looking at one flower of either one, you really can't say which it is. This is St. David's, not a good cut flower, but for just garden color, where you might put an azalea instead, it's this one is the opposite of what I've been talking about. This one is always totally covered with flowers. Just an amazing color producer. It's a China, so it's immune to everything, and really is a carefree rose. This is one I would highly recommend as just a landscape plant or even for a hedge. That was a younger plant, only about 3 feet tall. It will eventually go maybe 6 feet tall. It's a good sized bush, but not huge. Trinity is the only pure white tea that I know of, and it can also have a little pink in some weather, but usually it's pure white. This is the grave at Holy Trinity Church where it was first discovered. This is not the original plant. The Bermuda Rose Society discovered it growing there. They named it Trinity for the church, took cuttings, put them back in that mist bed at Tula Valley, and then came back for more cuttings, and during the time they were gone, the caretaker at the church had ripped it out and killed it. And so all of the existing plants of that existed as unrooted cuttings in their mist bed, and fortunately, some of them rooted. And so they planted it back at the church and have explained to the church why you need to keep this. It's the only one we've ever seen in this rose. And so that is the replacement. A few years ago, I took a group of Florida Southern Junior Journey students, and Alicia went as my chaperone. Quite a wild and crazy group of students, and we said, we'll never do this again. But there's Lisbeth Cooper showing that group the Trinity Rose on its original site. Very nice tea rose. It's not as carefree as some teas. It does get some black spot. The flowers will get botrytis, but it's a nice rose and a good white. spice is probably a China, although some people say it may be a tea. Makes these palest pink, almost white flowers in big clusters. As its name implies, it's quite fragrant. This is one that when my parents and I visited Bermuda, the Bermuda Rose Society put vases of these in our hotel rooms before we got there, and they lasted in the vase a whole week, so it's a great cut flower. Bermuda Kathleen is another one that was originally thought to be the hybrid musk Kathleen, which if you know Kathleen, you realize it doesn't look anything like this, and someone was just mistaken. So they call this one Bermuda Kathleen. They took away the apostrophe S because they realized this is a totally different rose from the actual Kathleen. And they're picky about that too. If you make that with an apostrophe S, they will write and correct you. So this thing, you can see they're not very shapely flowers, but again, as a landscape shrub, if you need a big bush that's always covered with flowers, this is the one to have. It's like a miniature flowered mutabolus. You get yellow, white, pink, almost red, sometimes slightly orange, all in the same bush, and the bush is always completely covered with flowers. That one in my garden is probably 8 to 9 feet tall there. So give it space, but it will give you a lot of garden color. Vincent Godsif is a hot pink. Can be almost red, just depending on weather. And probably a tea, I'm not sure. Very upright growing, not a really big bush. As teas go, I would say it's kind of moderate size, but a nice one. I like it a lot. And a good rebloomer. Probably the most famous of all the Bermuda roses is Smith's Parish, which is thought perhaps to be the original Fortune's 5-color rose that came from China. We'll probably never prove that. Mostly it makes white flowers. Occasionally it makes a flower with a pink or a red stripe, and on rare occasions it makes an all red flower. If you get a branch that makes all red and you take a cutting from it, there is the possibility that you'll get a plant that remains not red, but not any white. So it'll vary in shades of pink to red, and that one is named Red Smith's Parish and is considered a separate variety. I've heard people say that it can sport back to the white form. We've grown it for many years here, well, ever since the late 80s, and I've never seen a red one sport back to white. I do see the white one sport to red. So just some pictures here of the variation you see. I like it when it does that, where you get a truly red stripe. This is in Margaret King's garden in Bermuda, and I wish mine would do that. I've never seen it do that many stripes. This is the original bush that we got our cuttings from, again from Lorna Mercer. And I wish now, if I could go back and do this over, that I would have got cuttings from somebody else. Because Lorna's husband, Bill, was fascinated by the genetics of this thing. And so he took cuttings from all white branches, would grow them out, pick an all white branch from that, grow it out. He wanted to get one that would stay white all the time. And he was never able to. And so this was his failure, he told me, that it would not stay white. And that's what I got the cuttings from. The problem is, with us, we get a higher percentage of all white than you would see in Bermuda plants other than on that plant. So I wish I had mine from a different source. I've tried to select cuttings from branches that make a lot of red stripes. We've never got it back to doing that candy stripe thing that you saw in Margaret's garden. I've never seen one in Florida do that, and that's too bad. But all the other ones, all the other pictures that I showed you were from my garden. Belfield is the other famous one from Bermuda. It may be the original Slater's Crimson China. And if it is, this is another one we'll probably never prove, but if this is the real Slater's Crimson China that came from China to Europe, this is the source of the genetics for all currently existing red roses on the earth. Up until Slater's Crimson China came to Europe, all roses would go to pink, but never to true red. And so like in the English Wars of the Roses, the red rose of Lancaster is bright pink, it's not red. I learned this just recently, that there are countries, I think it's in Portugal, in fact maybe anywhere they speak Portuguese, that they have two different words for blue. There's dark blue and then there's the color of the sky, which is considered a totally different color. And as English speakers, we think that's weird, and yet we don't think it weird at all, that red is not the same as pink. It's exactly the same thing. You could do that with any color. So pink is just like red, but we gave it a new name. And so before the time of the China roses, if you read about red roses, they always were what we would now call pink. So anyway, this may be the great-great-great-great-granddaddy of all of our red roses. This is very compact growing. It's a true China, so it does not get much disease. And knee high is about what I expect it to do. If it gets to be waist high, it's huge. So it's, if you need a compact, really almost a miniature plant, this is a good one. Always in bloom. And then yellow mutabilis. This is a sport of the regular mutabilis, which has various shades of pink and orange and deep pink and sort of kind of yellow. This one starts out true pale yellow and may develop a little bit of pink toward the end, but it never gets as dark as regular mutabilis. If you grow regular mutabilis, you probably know it's one of the biggest rose bushes in your garden. It's not, I won't say twice as big as mutabilis, but plan on it taking over your garden. It is a monster. We used to prune ours every year with a saw, and we would cut limbs as big as your arm off of it. That was just a normal pruning day. Pacific then is a rose that they grow, that they consider a mystery rose. They do have a record of who brought it. It was a ship's captain who had brought a ship around the Cape down in South America from the Pacific Ocean and was sailing back to Europe and stopped in Bermuda for supplies. And so they got this rose from him. This is the rose we call Maggie. In India, they call it Kakinada Red. I have seen it growing in Burma and also in Bangladesh. It seems like any tropical part of the world that you go to, people will be growing this rose that we call Maggie. And yet nobody knows what it is, which is a really weird thing. But it's one of my favorite roses. Those of you who grow it probably would agree. It's one of your favorite roses. It grows like a weed. It blooms all the time. It smells good. It's just beautiful. So anyway, this is their form of it. It's exactly the same as ours. This is Maggie in my garden a few years ago.
How pretty.
So that's all of them. There are several more that we never brought in, and I don't know if anybody ever will, but if you read the Bermudians book, the Mystery Rose section has another 3 or 4 roses that we don't have in the U.S. as far as I know. So, if you've got questions, I'll try to answer them.
Malcolm, who did the photography?
Me.
Oh, you did all of it?
Yeah, I think all of it is mine. Well, no, the ones of the society meeting is off of their webpage, but all of the plant pictures and all the travel log pictures are mine from many different years of visits.
How often does their society meet?
During COVID, they didn't meet at all. I don't think they ever did go online, but they are now back to meeting monthly. I don't know if there's a time of the year that they stop or not, but it's like we do, but it's monthly.
So I mean, if we went over, we could contact, and if it was, we were there during a meeting, we would be welcome.
They would love to have you do that. Yeah, Alicia.
I just have a comment. I was really thrilled to get to go there, and it is one of the nicest countries you could ever visit. The people on the bus, they will get up, young people will get up and give somebody like me with a cane their seat. The kids love to talk to you and find out about where you live in the States. They're all very polite. The bus drivers, if somebody misbehaves, they shut them down.
Yeah.
And the people on the bus, it's a kinder, gentler place. So if you ever get the opportunity to go, I highly recommend you jump at it.
Yeah. It is kind of pricey. It's like a weekend at Disney. Just plan to spend some bucks, but it's if anything could be worth it, it is. It's a very easy place to visit. internationally compared to other places because they use American-style plugs and electricity. You don't need any adapters or anything. They use the Bermuda dollar, but they accept American dollars in exchange on a one-to-one basis, so you don't even have to change your money.